Hello. It's a privilege today to be with you and to be able to talk about the consecrated life in the Catholic Church, which, as the title shows, is a true gem in the life of the Church. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Father John Guthrie. Currently, I'm the Associate Director for the Secretariat of Clergy, Consecrated Life, and Vocations for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops here in Washington, D.C. Just to talk a little bit about and get a sense of where we want to go with this webinar, there's a number of things that I want to highlight for you today. First of all, the whole issue of the Year of Consecrated Life, which we currently just started. The whole question of the Vatican II's teaching on consecrated life, some of the fundamentals of consecrated life, and then move into some current opportunities and challenges that face consecrated life worldwide. And then hopefully have a little time for some questions and answers that we might, or dialogue, just to talk about the current state of consecrated life and where we're at. So that gives you a little idea of the outline and kind of the trajectory of what I'm going to try to do today. I want to start with talking about the Year of Consecrated Life. Pope Francis proclaimed this over, I would say, early 2014, late 2013, and it runs from the 30th of November of 2014, which is the first Sunday of Advent, all the way through the February 2nd of 2016, which is the day for the celebration of consecrated life. So 14 months for the Church to really, as a Church, to celebrate and to make a grateful remembrance for all the good and the beautiful work that consecrated persons, men and women, have given to the Church. I think all of us have been touched in one way or another, even in schools and hospitals and various forms of the apostolates that people in consecrated life have given over the years. And it's really, the Holy Father wants us to be able to celebrate the great work that has been done, but also to embrace the future with hope. Where are we going? And what are the new initiatives that needs to be taken as the Church moves forward? One of the things as you look at the history of the 2,000 years of the Church and how consecrated life has been a part of it, is to realize that the consecrated life has always met certain demands that the culture and the times have demanded. And that has been a great grace, not just for the Church, but for the world. The timing also of this year of consecrated life coincides with the 50th anniversary of the Vatican II statement, Perfecte Caritatis, which is one of the 16 documents of the Second Vatican Council, and this one's specifically on consecrated life. And also the 50th anniversary of Lumen Gentium, which is the constitution on the Church, and has a whole section in there, a whole chapter on consecrated life. So it's a good way for us to celebrate what Vatican II did and said as the Church Fathers met there 50 years ago. I also just want to call your attention to some of the resources that the Conference of Catholic Bishops have provided regarding this Year of Consecrated Life. You can see I put on the slide here the website that you can tie into and some of the resources that are provided, an introductory video by Bishop Burbidge, who's the chairman of the Committee on Clergy, Consecrated Life, and Vocations, and also Bishop Callahan. A prayer card in English and Spanish for a celebration of the Year of Consecrated Life. I invite you to look at that and maybe share that with different groups. And finally, to highlight some of the days with religious, Day of Open House, February 8th of 2015, Day of Service sometime in the summer, and a Day of Prayer on September 13th. This provides opportunities for different religious congregations to invite individuals, but most especially families, to come in and pray, work, and just have an open house with the larger Catholic population and even beyond the Catholic Church. The family focus is important because next year, as you know, there will be the Ordinary Synod on the Family. There's the World Day of Families in Philadelphia, where the Holy Father will come. So it's really a time to really concentrate very much on family, but also consecrated life. So it's going to be a big year for us, and I invite you to see some of the resources there that are provided on our website. I just want to talk a little bit about the Second Vatican Council. Perfecta Caritatis, at the very first paragraph, talks about consecrated life. And as you know, I'm a diocesan priest, and I belong to a diocese under a bishop. And there are many priests that are part of that live their lives. We live our lives that way. The vast majority of people in the church, of course, are the laity, laymen and women who witness to Christ in so many different ways in the workplace and in family life. But there's a very special place in the church for men and women who have given their lives in consecrated life. And the Second Vatican Council talked very directly about that in the very first paragraph of Perfecta Caritatis, when it said this, that the Church Fathers said, from the very beginning of the church, there were men and women who set out to follow Christ with greater liberty and to imitate him more closely by practicing the evangelical counsels. And in a one sentence, I think that very much describes this very important niche in the church that where men and women seek to follow Christ more with greater liberty. And I want to talk a little bit more about that as Perfecta Caritatis does. Because the Second Vatican II, as in so many areas of church life, really saw a renewal of religious life as part of its mandate. And the Church Fathers talked about it in terms of 5 principles. First of all, as we've said, following Christ intentionally. Secondly, that each order, each community of consecrated people, men and women, would have their own proper character. And so the council very famously invited each religious congregation and group to rediscover, reinvigorate the spirit and aims of the founders of their order, to go back and really think, now, who was the founder and what did he or she say in terms of the apostolate, in terms of the particular mission of each individual order. So it was a great opportunity for religious orders to go back and really rethink and get back to those foundational moments of when their order was founded. And that the aim and the spirit of each founder should be accepted faithfully and retained. So I believe that in post-Vatican II time, it was a tremendous time for people to really rethink that and get back to that original, what we call charism. Thirdly, the Fathers talked about to share in the life of the church. I want to talk a little bit about that in a bit, but there's always an ecclesial, a church dimension to religious orders. Fourthly, to know the nature of humanity and the signs of the times, so that if they're, the order not only has to go back to what the original founder charism was, but also to say, we live today in modern times, right now in the 21st century, what are the signs of the times, and each order has to ask, how can we meet these signs of the times, and what can we bring to humanity and to our world and to the church now? And finally, to be more united with God through the 3 evangelical councils. A little bit more on 2 of those dimensions. First, the ecclesial. There's always an important dimension here, because the purpose is not just to do one's own thing as a congregation, as a community, but it's always to build up the life and holiness of the church. And it is up to the whole church to promote consecrated life, because it's such an important element of who we are as church. So that church dimension is very important. And of course, the evangelical council modeled on Jesus Christ. That Jesus lived these 3 dimensions so beautifully and perfectly in his life. And consecrated life is all about trying to imitate the Lord in these. In poverty, a life which is poor in fact and in spirit, so that a life should be led with moderation, not with extravagance. So one doesn't get caught up in the ways of the world, to be in the world but not of the world, as Jesus talked about. Chastity, that the abundant fruitfulness of an undivided heart is very important for a consecrated man or woman. And in this case, to be lived in celibacy. And finally, obedience, the submission of one's will to legitimate superiors. And when one meditates on the life of Jesus Christ, one can see that he lived these three counsels so beautifully and so perfectly. And so when a man or woman is called and begins to live consecrated life, these counsels are absolutely at the center. Whether they're lived, and it depends on obviously the order of the institute that one lives in, but it can be lived literally or certainly in spirit. And we'll see that in terms of, for example, the secular institutes and some other forms of consecrated life. And that poverty, chastity, obedience are always at the center of the spirit of each form of consecrated life. It's a very complicated area, and I was thinking about this as I was preparing. Consecrated life is very dynamic, very complicated, and very diverse, and that's a good thing. One of the great things about the church is that we're very large, and so there's a lot of different ways, a lot of diversity in consecrated life, just as there are in between individual Catholics. And that's a good thing. It seems to me that unity in the midst of diversity is the name of the game. And if you look at the history of consecrated life, you can see the tremendous diversity that's involved. It's a wide category. There are men and women congregations. There are clerical and lay congregations. Clerical assumes the exercise of sacred orders. Lay does not necessarily include the exercise of sacred orders. They're pontifical and diocesan rite congregations. A pontifical would be a congregation that the Holy See has erected or approved, and a diocesan rite is one that a diocesan bishop has approved it. Most forms of consecrated life are pontifical, but there are some that are diocesan as well. And also, I must say that there are consecrated life form of consecrated life congregations that are Western Rite and Eastern Rite. So, we have a whole section of the church that are Eastern Rite that we often, as Latin Rite, do not necessarily think too much of or think about too much about. We think a lot about. We think of them well, but we don't necessarily know a lot about them. But there's a whole segment of consecrated life that are in these Eastern rites. So I just want to say that that's why what I'm going to talk about today is just going to be a little thumb sketch of what we're trying to do here. So let me jump in a little bit. There are different types, and the church understands this as different types of consecrated life. The first type is what we call a religious institute, and I'm going to go into each one of these a little bit in depth, again, but we could spend hours, and there are classes specifically directed to this, so I hope you understand I'm going to be just kind of skimming the surface here. There are societies of apostolic life, and then there are a few other forms of consecrated life that don't fit into these two categories, but you should be aware of just to give you an understanding of how varied this is and how diverse and how wonderful. Let's talk about religious institutes. Now, remember, there are many examples here, and I'm going to talk about some of the examples, but I just want you to know that I'm just skimming the surface here too. both men and women orders, certainly for the monastic and mendicant orders, but also as well in the apostolic life, orders that are given over to education and healthcare and things like that. Now, most of what I'm going to be talking about, just for the sake of brevity, is men's orders, but I do want to recognize that everything I'm saying in men's orders is often very much duplicated in women's orders as well. So there's examples for all of this. So I want to talk then about these four different parts of the religious institutes, four different aspects of it, starting with the monastic orders. Some of you know or have been to a monastery. Monastic orders were founded by monks or nuns who live and work in a monastery and recite the divine office, which is very much based on the psaltery, the 150 Psalms of the Old Testament, and they pray in common and they have life in common. Some examples of this would be the Benedictines, or the Cistercians, or the Trappists. The Benedictines were really the first here, at least in the Western tradition, and then the Cistercians and the Trappists were reform movements within the Benedictine movement. These are cloistered and contemplative places. I hope that at some point that you've had a chance or make a point to visit a monastery or a convent, because they're beautiful places where you can experience the quiet and contemplation. They're so very focused on God. Benedictines, for example, have as their motto, ora et labora. They pray and they work, and they do it in community. These are generally, for the Benedictines, these come from an earlier part of the church history. The Benedictines date from the 6th century. And so they were meeting at a time when Western civilization was starting to disintegrate, and Benedict and Scholastica went out and they had this experience of God living contemplatively in the midst of a world that was really falling apart. And they still do this, even in a world that we live in that can be highly secularized. These monasteries become places of tremendous contemplation, and they pray for the whole church. And they're examples to us of whatever form of vocation we have, they're examples to us of how to live a prayerful life. And what does it mean to be contemplative in the busyness of what we do? A great example for us. And that's, I think, true for all forms of consecrated life, is that they not only provide service and do wonderful things, but they also live as leaven in the midst of the world and really call us, no matter who we are, to a vision of a Christian life. That's the monastic orders. In the Middle Ages, there were a number of orders that were founded that were called mendicant orders. These were founded by friars or nuns who live from alms, recite the divine office, and instead of staying in the monastery, in the cloister, they move out and have active participation in apostolic endeavors. Examples of this would be the Dominicans, the Franciscans, the Augustinians, the Carmelites. And it really shows, when you look at the history of consecrated life through the life of the church, it shows that how God is active, that he really saw that there was need in a society where things were, well, could be very difficult, very poor, where often the poor were neglected. All of a sudden, God calls people like St. Dominic and St. Francis to, in their own way, rejuvenate the church. And they did. They changed the church for the better. Francis, working with the poor and calling people to, and working and preaching. Dominic, of course, the great preacher. And so new orders, if you look as you go through the history, are always popping up to meet specific needs. These are just some of the major ones in the mendicants, but of course there are others. Finally, thirdly, I want to talk about clerics regular. I don't want to get too caught up in that term, but these were orders founded by priests who are also religious with vows and have a very active apostolic life. An example of this would be the Jesuits, founded in the 16th century by St. Ignatius of Loyola, often involved here specifically in the work of the Counter-Reformation. The Reformation in the early 16th century in the church was a tremendously traumatic time. And in the midst of this, the Jesuits were founded, and others, the Theatines as well, and many others, to meet the needs of that time where things were very traumatic. And they came to work in areas, for example, just take the Jesuits, for example, in education. They founded schools and colleges, universities, and seminaries. They got involved in intellectual research and cultural pursuits. They worked very heavily in giving retreats and ministering in hospitals and parishes and promoting social justice. It's just some of the things that the Jesuits are known for. But again, it was to meet the needs, particularly in the 16th century. And as the Jesuits, as every order does, evolved to meet the needs now, today. It's very important we have well-educated, well-formed laymen and women to meet the needs that the church faces in the marketplace and in family life. Canons regular. Again, very quickly here, these are orders founded by canons and canonesses who recite the divine office and are generally in charge of parishes. So we think of the Norbertines here. St. Norbert was a friend of St. Bernard of Clairvaux in the Middle Ages and was largely influenced by Cistercian ideals. Again, that monastic, but they weren't called to be monks and live a monastic life. They were called to work more in parishes, to involve preaching, to exercise pastoral ministry, close to abbeys or priories, but not called to be within the cloister. Croziers, the same thing. They took their way of life involves three parts: life in community setting, daily communion, communal celebration of the church's liturgy, and some form of active ministry: preaching, directing retreats, parish work, education, prison ministry, immigration services, spiritual direction. Again, very much close to monastery, but living in the world. And again, meeting the needs of the times. So, in terms of I want to jump to that. Thank you. I lost my slide there a little bit. Societies of apostolic life. Now, we were talking about the institutes, religious institutes. We made those four. There's a whole nother section of consecrated life. Are you getting a sense that this is complicated and multifaceted? It is. Societies of apostolic life are a whole nother segment of consecrated life. They resemble religious institutes, which we just talked about, but they pursue the apostolic purpose proper to their society. They lead a life in common as brothers or sisters, but they don't make religious vows. A vow is a promise to God. The members of societies take promises, oaths, written contracts, depending on their particular society, but not religious vows per se. That's something that's just a little different. Some examples of Society of Apostolic Life. For men, the Palatines. I'm here at the Catholic Apostolic Center. I wanted to be able to recognize that. The Palatines their particular charism is to assist everybody in finding and living their apostolic vocation in life. through a revival of faith and a rekindling of charity. Another form of Societies of Apostolic Life are the Sulpicians, who are given specifically to training of priests and seminaries. Or the Paulists, whose work is really around evangelization, ecumenism, and interfaith relations and reconciliation. They really see the Paulists under Isaac Hecker, who founded them in the 19th century, to really seek to be a bridge between the church and contemporary culture. And I think many of us are aware of the Maryknollers. The Maryknollers, a group of American men and women who give themselves to, in the Society of Apostolic Life, that is the Society of Maryknoll, to missionary service, to say we would like to go and be missionaries throughout the world and focus on combating poverty, providing health care, building communities, and advancing peace and social justice in a lot of different countries. And finally, in women, just as an example there, would be the Daughters of Charity. They're an example of a female Society of Apostolic Life devoted to serving Jesus Christ in persons who are poor through the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. That's a whole other segment of consecrated life, the Societies of Apostolic Life, who again meet very many needs in our society and in the church. I think when we think about consecrated life, we should be very proud that we are part of a church that has this kind of service arm that works very hard to make the world a better place and really bring Jesus Christ to a world that's so thirsting for him, whether the world knows it or not. Just a few more forms of consecrated life. There are diocesan hermits that really work, and these are under a diocesan bishop who petition to the bishop to live specifically as a hermit within the diocese, to pray for the men and women specifically in that diocese, for the priests and religious in that diocese, but also throughout the world, but specifically there, and are really answerable to the bishop. So the bishop works with them, if they're called to this, to set up a kind of a plan of life and a way of living. And he is ultimately responsible to oversee how they're doing. Consecrated virgins, another whole group of women who give their lives to and consecrate it in front of a diocesan bishop to say, I'm going to live my life in the world, but as a consecrated virgin. I'm giving my life over to Christ in this particular way. And they do beautifully, and are tremendous examples for all those around. And finally, a part of the church that I don't think gets a lot of attention, but is a very interesting one that came about just really before the Second Vatican Council, this whole movement of what were called secular institutes. What is a secular institute? Secular institutes are for people who live in the world, but strive for perfection of charity and work, and contribute by their living in the world to the sanctification of the world. It's very important that these communities, and of course, you're living in pretty much your own home, you're doing your work in the secular world, but you're part of a community that must describe in some specific way how the evangelical counsels are going to be lived: poverty, chastity, and obedience. It's very important to know that members of a secular institute can't be bound by ties to any other institute of consecrated life, and they can't be bound to marriage. They can't be in a marriage. So that's very important as part of what we talked about in terms of the celibate commitment. I hope that by just talking about all these forms, the religious institutes, societies of apostolic life, and these other forms of consecrated life, that you get a strong sense of the variety. I want to talk briefly now, just to change gears a little bit, about opportunities and challenges that are facing consecrated life today. Because I think it's very important to think, where are we as a church now with consecrated life? I want to talk first about the opportunities and some of the graces that we have now in the church. A study that the USCCB conducted a couple years ago found that there was a tremendous interest in vocations to the priesthood and the consecrated life. I think this is very, very encouraging. There are thousands of people currently in formation for consecrated life now, and also the study showed that 600,000 men and women just in the United States from the age of 14 to 35, never married Catholic, have seriously considered a vocation to the priesthood or to the consecrated life. I think that's a very good, wonderful thing to think about, that there is that kind of pool out there. These are not just people that have thought about it, haphazardly, but have seriously considered it. So I think that's very good news, that there are new vocations currently in formation, and there's a large pool that are seriously considering it. Of course, we all have to think about how we form a culture of vocations in our parishes, in our families, in our church world, so that young men and women are in a place where they're nurtured and where they can ask the vocational question: what is God asking of me? Calls come from God, but are we placing our young men and women in a place where they can hear that call? That's an important question that the bishops constantly ask as we consider vocations. Another opportunity, I think, for consecrated life is the increased diversity that we're finding in the men and women who are choosing consecrated life, and they're choosing to say yes to God's call to consecrated life. 94% of those people who are in perpetual vows in our community, religious communities, are white, Anglo. But interesting enough, 58% who are in initial formation are Anglo. So we are seeing, because of the great diversity and increased cultural diversity within the church, we're seeing that also spill over now into consecrated life. And that is a great thing, because one of the great things about being Catholic is that we really are universal. The arms are wide. Everybody's, as James Joyce said, here comes everybody. It's true. And that's showing up now more and more in consecrated life, that communities are getting more and more diverse. And that has its challenges, no doubt about it, but I think the graces are even greater. Thirdly, there's a desire for community in young people. There's a true hunger for the communal life and for prayer. And when people come in constantly, we hear this from vocation directors, from institutes of apostolic life, and religious institutes. They ask them, well, what drew you here? And the young people said, we were looking for something in this individualized world. We're looking for communal life. We're looking for a place where we can live in unity with our brothers or our sisters and be in prayer. I think that's good news. Something that can be tapped into in terms of the future. And finally, contentment. There is, in the newer entrants, those people that are coming in now to religious life, a real sense of peace in following God's call. All our studies show that personal and communal prayer and a life of service is very attractive to people. In my home, we have a Benedictine priory, and oftentimes I'll go down to the group of the women's religious, and I'll go down to the cemetery to see some of the graves of some of the sisters that taught me and made a great difference in my life. And I will go down the row, and so many of them live so much beyond the life expectancy that we have in our country. And I used to think, why are these women living so long? And I think one of the reasons is they have a life of purpose. they have a life of prayer, they're making a difference, they're very happy. And that shows clearly in just in visiting with them and the fact that they're living longer. I just think it says that their purpose never dies out. A beautiful thing, I think. And that contentment is showing up also in the newer entrants. That's the real good news, I think, of what's happening in consecrated life now. Of course, there are challenges. We have changing demographics. From 2000, we've had the numbers of sisters in the United States has dropped 38%. And the number of religious priests in the United States has dropped by 20%. That's a tremendous challenge. Many communities are very stressed in terms of just the numbers, and the aging population is a real issue for many. And I think we know this just anecdotally. The median age of religious men is 66 years old right now, and the median age of religious women is 73 years old. So that's a large challenge for many of the congregations as they look to the future and to say, what's this going to mean for our apostolate? What's it going to mean for the work we do? What's it going to mean for the people we serve? What's it going to mean for the charism that we are trying to carry on? All the more reason to really work for vocations and to where, however we can, to pray for vocations to the consecrated life. There are also some obstacles to vocations. One of the newest obstacles, and I just want to point this out, is the whole issue of college debt. We're seeing this more and more, and of course, naturally with the rising costs of college education, educational debt is becoming a big issue. 1/3 of women, for example, who have entered religious life have a debt of $20,000 on average. That's a significant thing. And we have found that in some instances, it has deterred or delayed them from entering religious life. There are some organizations that are really trying to tackle this now, and I think we should be just aware of that. I talked about the growing diversity within religious life now, and one of the challenges, I think, to be honest, is how a religious community accommodates international members. Vocation directors and leadership, we have found, are fairly good at this, but the general membership of a religious community often is not so good at this. So if a member, a sister, or a priest or a brother comes from another country, how are they welcomed in terms of that particular community? Thankfully, many religious communities know this is an issue and are working very hard to develop intercultural competence, which is necessary to keep them and to develop these newer members. And just a word of a challenge in terms of the wider culture. I think we know that oftentimes the call to religious life and to consecrated life can be silenced, that many people don't even know about religious life. And that's why I'm grateful to be able to give this webinar, just to be able to talk a little bit more generally to increase awareness of what it is. So many people don't know because they've never been exposed. I've served in parishes where the young men and women, you talk to them about a religious sister or a religious brother, and their eyes glaze over. They don't know what that means. So I think that's a huge challenge. How will they know if God is calling them if they have never been exposed? And secondly, our culture can really limit the sense of what is important. In a study of 18 to 23-year-olds, one of the things that the study showed was that the values are challenged in some ways. Get a good job, become financially secure, have a nice family, buy what you want, enjoy a few of the finer things in life, avoid the troubles of the world, and retire with ease. That's it. But there's so much more to life than that. And I think in a culture which values that type of a lifestyle, it may be hard for people to hear. I want to just conclude with a prayer that the bishops have written for this year of consecrated life. And perhaps you can pray it with me. I put it on the screen. It's also available, as I said, on the USCCB website. A chance for us to think about and to pray for this year of consecrated life. Let us pray. O God, throughout the ages, you have called women and men to pursue lives of perfect charity through the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience. During this year of consecrated life, we give you thanks for these courageous witnesses of faith and models of inspiration. Their pursuit of holy lives teaches us to make a more perfect offering of ourselves to you. Continue to enrich your church by calling forth sons and daughters who, having found the pearl of great price, treasure the kingdom of heaven above all things. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. That's my presentation. And now I have an opportunity to invite you to ask a question, make an observation. This is a little time for you to interact with me or in whatever way you'd like to. One question is, what more can we do to assist others in learning more about consecrated life? It's really a great question. I think one of the challenges is for where parishes, I think we have to think where people are and where we can meet them. First of all, I think diocesan priests, bishops and priests need to talk a little bit, and this year of consecrated life is really a wonderful opportunity for us to re-engage in what consecrated life is, how important it has been for us in the life of the church, and to really ask people to think about it, to talk with them about it, to invite somebody who's in consecrated life to come and talk to the parish, perhaps after communion at Mass. They have a Sunday that can be dedicated to that. I think to bring people, to invite people in consecrated life to come to the parish and say, you know, we have sister or father or whoever is going to be in the back of the church or is going to be at Coffee and Rolls. Why don't you come and greet them? It would be a wonderful opportunity to access that. Also our educational schools, you know, universities, high schools, grade schools, to take the opportunity for principals or presidents of universities to really say, how can we highlight this for young people? I really believe, too, that these days with religious are going to be important. That somehow we can promote, and it's going to take congregations of consecrated life to step up and say, we're going to have open houses, we're going to have moments of prayer, we're going to have moments of service opportunities, or invite others. I think the key is access. We have found over and over again in our studies of vocations that the whole issue is relationships. What moves somebody to really consider a religious vocation is if they know, if they see, and so we have to work with, in terms of the diocesan side, and bishops and priests, to work with religious to make sure we're giving access and that religious congregations really take an active role to learn what this is. I like to think that, again, I'm very glad for this webinar because it gives an opportunity to learn a little bit more about consecrated life. We really have to do that. And the second question we have here is, how does a priest who is religious differ from a diocesan priest? Well, we're all, for priests, we're all under the priesthood of Jesus Christ. So we hold a lot in common. We celebrate the sacraments. We do all those things. But for a diocesan priest, I am under a bishop. And so I'm answerable to a bishop. And primarily, most diocesan priests work in parishes. That's where our main focus is. Now, some religious priests certainly do that as well, but generally that's where we're at. And of course, there's a spirituality of a diocesan priest in terms of praying the office, the liturgy of the hours, in terms of working with people. Our ministry is really working with men and women, boys and girls of all ages in terms of parish life. Religious can do that, but they're also involved in a lot of different other things: education, health care, to name a few. Certainly monastic orders are living the contemplative life. And I think the key here is that they have a special spirituality depending on who their founder was. So if you're a Jesuit, Ignatius of Loyola, and the Ignatian spirituality becomes how you live priesthood. So it's, you know, and you can say that about every religious order. So a religious priest will live priesthood with that particular spirituality. And again, it's great, it's wonderful that the church has Carmelites, Palatines, Jesuits, Franciscans, because they all bring a certain spirituality that is so rich and we can all learn from. But that's basically the difference. And of course, a religious priest is answerable to his superior, whoever that may be, the abbot or the religious superior, the general, depending on which religious order. Everybody has a different term for that. But it's not a bishop. It's a religious superior, and that's who they answer to. Hope that helps. And who is your favorite saint that was a member of the consecrated life, and why? Well, there's two. I'm very much taken with St. Benedict, and mainly because these are the people that trained me. And that is St. Benedict was someone that really, in some ways, saved Western civilization. I mean, the Benedictines really did a tremendous job, and called at a time when the barbarians were at the door, and in fact were through the door. He really worked very hard to do that, and I think that that's why Pope Emeritus Benedict chose his name, Benedict, because he saw that Western civilization needed to be re-evangelized again. And Benedict, in fact, did that in the 6th century. So I was very much tied with that. And of course, I also had training with the Jesuits, so Ignatius I'm very fond of him, especially because I think that his spirituality has direct implication for a diocesan priest, because his spirituality was to be contemplative but in action. How can I be active in what I do, but can be contemplative in the way I do it? Another question is, how can we promote vocations to the consecrated life? I think I talked a little bit about that, but maybe I can take it just another step, is that it seems to me that when we talk about vocations of consecrated life, we should also talk about families. And I think when we're entering this year where family life is really front and center of what the church is going to be talking about with the synod and everything else, is how do we do this within our families? How do mothers and fathers discuss vocations in general, just a sense that God has a dream for you? How is that talked about? Not in a forceful way, not I think you should do this, but are we teaching people to pray? Because I think that, bottom line, it has to happen in this relationship with God. That's where the voca, the call, is heard in one's vocation. But also to say that in terms of specifically a vocation to consecrated life, it means that we have to do a very good job of talking to our families, and especially parents, about consecrated life. Many of them don't know what consecrated life is. How can we reach out so that they can know what that is? I think generally in given areas, certain orders have different prominence. So I think that, for example, is there a chance that you would take time to get to know somebody who is in consecrated life? Why not invite them over for a meal? How is anybody going to hear a vocation if they've never seen someone living it? And getting to know that it's a very normal form of life. It's in some ways very extraordinary, but ordinary people are called to this. And God takes the ordinary and makes it extraordinary by His grace. I think that can be very helpful. Any others? Well, I do hope this was helpful. I'm very grateful to the Catholic Apostolic Center for inviting me to be a part of this. And I want to just let you know this has been sponsored by them, and also we at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops are very glad to be a part of it. And many blessings for you, and continue to pray for vocations to the consecrated life. May God bless you.